Hi, and welcome back, 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 and welcome back. Apologies for the long delay since my last video. I've been a little under the weather, truth be told, but I'm trying to get back to normal now, and a video about delays seemed appropriate. Here's the stock Reaper delay plugin. It seems quite simple on the surface. There are global dry and wet sliders on the left. I'm running this as a send effect, so I'll turn the dry level down. The delay time can be set simultaneously in milliseconds, or as a beat division. And if you do both at once, they seem to add up. This is unusual. Most delay plugins want you to choose between a traditional delay time setting or a host synced setting, but I quite like being able to dial in a tempo synced delay, but then offset it by a little bit, as delay repeats that are too perfectly in time can sometimes get masked by the mix or stack up in an ugly way. Okay, next we have a feedback slider, helpfully calibrated in decibels. So let's try setting it to unity. And sure enough, the delays repeat forever without decaying in level at all. Let's turn it down to clear the delay buffer. Then set it back to unity again. And this time I'll also dial in some low and high pass filtering below. And now the delays get gradually louder instead of decaying. Let's stop that before it blows my speakers and draw a couple of conclusions. These filters must be in the feedback path of the delay, which is a good thing. And they must also be boosting the gain in some way, either with gain compensation or perhaps a bit of resonance. Let's try running some pink noise through the filters. That sounds like there's a bit of resonance to me. Notice how I'm picking out different frequencies as I sweep around. I discovered a feature I wasn't aware of while prepping for this video, but it's a bit hidden, and to be honest, at first I thought it was a bug. Notice what happens when I sweep the high-pass filter up high. It gets to a certain point, and then suddenly jumps and stops filtering anymore. At least that's how it first appeared. Then I noticed that it happens specifically when the high-pass filter is set higher than the low-pass filter, and realised what was going on. By default, the filters are connected in series to create a bandpass filter that removes low and high frequencies. But if you set the high-pass filter higher than the low-pass, they switch to run in parallel, which creates a band reject filter instead. This probably won't be useful as often as the more usual bandpass configuration, but it's nice to have the option. Before I move on, let's disable the filters again, set the feedback to almost infinite, and notice what happens when I adjust the delay time. Making it longer lengthens the delay buffer by adding silence, while making it shorter throws away a chunk of the feedback loop instead. With really short delay times, you can get cool granular effects. But if I'm honest, there are much easier ways to do granular type sounds. This is a very digital style of delay. It's not wrong as such, but it's not how classic analog tape or bucket brigade delays will behave. These will slow down or speed up the contents of the feedback loop when the delay time changes, making the audio play slower or faster, with all the associated pitch changes. Clearly, there's a whole class of crazy dub-style delay effects which are simply not available from a digital-style delay like ReaDelay. Fortunately, there are plenty of third-party plugins to fill the gap, including this free one from Valhalla DSP. Of course, the main selling point of this plugin, as far as that applies for a freebie, is the frequency shifting in the feedback path. This is a really nice effect when used subtly, and also fun when abused. It's an old favourite of mine that's well worth the download time. But there's another reason to want a more analog style of delay. More subtle delay time modulation, more in the manner of tape, wow and flutter. creates more subtle pitch modulation, which will in turn create subtle and organic flanging or chorusing effects when delay repeats stack up or overlap with the dry signal. Listen to this timeless 2 setting. And notice how it changes when I add subtle random modulation of the delay time. Now listen again when I add different random modulation for the left and right delays to add a sense of width and depth. These effects just aren't available in ReaDelay. You can try modulating the delay time using automation or parameter modulation, but it's not going to have the same effect. The best you could do would be to add modulation effects before or after the delay on the send channel. This can sound good, but it's not really the same. Moving on, the bit depth slider is a nice touch. I'm not clear whether the bit crushing happens inside the feedback loop or not, but either way it can sound good. Generally speaking, I'm all in favour of delay repeats sounding different in some way to the dry signal, so this gives us a way to make them gradually crunchier and more distorted as they decay in level. Nice. In some ways, this very digital style of distortion, which gets more extreme for quieter signals, is ideal for a delay effect. It means the sound will get progressively more distorted as the delays decay in level, which might help to add depth. And there'll also be a gating effect when quiet signals drop below the least significant bit and just stop, which might help to avoid clutter. But it's totally the opposite of what we would consider analog distortion, which tends to increase as the signal levels increase. There's none of that in ReaDelay. If the feedback builds up in level, it just gets louder and louder. Things get much more interesting with some analog-style non-linearities in the feedback path. Notice how this echo rec emulation from Pulsar behaves with a similar setting. Now, of course, you might not be doing this kind of thing in every mix, but that old characterful saturation is still there with more conventional settings, and I feel like it helps to add a sense of warmth and depth. But perhaps I'm just being fooled by the picture of the spinning drum on the interface. This isn't just eye candy, incidentally. You can click it to press your thumb against the drum and modulate the delay time, which is fun. Anyway, back in ReaDelay. Down at the bottom, we have volume and pan faders for the delayed signal. And that would seem to be it. Until we realise we can add another delay tap, which gets its own tab and its own settings. And you can create lots of these. As many as you want, perhaps. Don't know, haven't tested it. Certainly as many as you're likely to need. This allows you to create complex multi-tap effects, which is great. However, I'm afraid they've kind of missed a trick. I wish there was a global feedback slider alongside the global dry and wet sliders. For two reasons. First, it's nice to be able to ride the feedback sometimes, or automate it, and this is much easier when there's a global feedback control. I can, of course, link the feedback sliders in Reaper. If all the other taps share the same feedback setting as the first tap, then I can just use that one to control them all. But that doesn't help with the other reason. This trick feeds every tap back on itself. But we would get much more complex results if all the delay taps were summed, then fed back to all delay taps. I can show you what I mean by duplicating the effect track a bunch of times and sending them all into each other in a chain. That's lots of fun. But of course the delays will stop when they get to the end of the chain, rather than decaying forever. And it's perhaps not the most practical workaround anyway, though I suppose you could stick all these tracks in a folder and hide them away. Well, I don't suppose the developers will watch this video, less still respond as quickly as they did to my first recomp video, but you never know. So here's my list of feature requests. I mentioned the global feedback control already, but don't stop there. Give us some interesting non-linearities to play with in that feedback loop. I would actually love some kind of simplified version of recomp in the feedback path that could compress to help keep runaway feedback under control, but could also do those super fast attack and release times that start to cross over into saturation and distortion. Okay, next request. As we've added dynamics already, let's have a dedicated ducker section. Give it its own tab if you have to. Ducking is such a useful effect. Of course, it can be set up fairly easily with sidechain routing and another plugin. Unfortunately, recomp isn't ideal for this, and neither is regate in ducking mode. In both cases because they have no range control. I consider that quite an oversight for a gate plugin, by the way, but that's another video. Anyway, the sidechain method only works if you're running the delay as a send effect. You can alternatively use parameter modulation. That can actually be very effective. But it's a little fiddly to set up, as, in truth, is the sidechain and separate plugin method. It's so much easier when ducking is built into the plugin, like here in UVI Relayer. No routing required, just turn it on and dial it in. The way the UVI plugin handles ducking reminds me of the TC Electronic D2 hardware delay, which could often be found at front of house back when I used to run live sound. Most engineers didn't know about the feature, so it was kind of like my secret weapon. Really useful when a vocal, when mixing a band you've never heard before. Okay, final request. What if each tap, apart from the first, had the option to take its input from the previous delay tap, instead of the main plugin input? And what if this was the default behavior for tap 2 and upward? Here's my reasoning. Currently, adding a tap duplicates the settings of the current tap, which just stacks an identical delay repeat on top of the existing one. Nothing interesting happens until you change the delay time for the new tap. But if tap 2 defaulted to take its input from tap 1, adding it would add another evenly spaced repeat, and adding a third would add another repeat, and so on. Creating complex multi-tap patterns would be much quicker and easier. And of course, feedback within each tap would start to create more complex results as those repeats feed into the next tap. Okay, I've probably gone on for long enough now. Don't delay hitting the like button and subscribing, and feel free to feedback in the comments. Thanks for watching.